My name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today, via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guest Devon Zimmerman from the Ogunquit Museum of American Art. Devon serves as the curator of modern and contemporary art, and he's here today to inform us about the much anticipated exhibition entitled Anthony Cudahy, Spinneret. This is Mr. Cudahy's first solo exhibition in the United States, and will be on view from April 12th through July 21st. Let's start by meeting Devon and then hearing all about Anthony Cudahy and the outstanding selection of his artwork that will be on display. Welcome, Devon. Delighted to see you again.
Yes, good to see you too, Jay. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to share this show with your audience.
You know, I always look forward to the season opening of the museum, eager to hear all about Anthony Cudahy and his artwork and inform viewers. But before we jump right to that, would you just spend a brief bit of time, a little bit about your background, professional interests, and what your role at the museum entails?
Yeah, so I am the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Ogunquit Museum of American Art. I've been fortunate enough to be in Ogunquit now for about almost pushing 2 years as of nearly the opening of this exhibition. And it's a remarkable institution that was founded out of the legacy of these turn of the century artist schools that greeted figures from Boston-based locals like Charles Woodbury to titans of American modernism like Marston Hartley, the Hen Rice School, and all of these folks that passed through. So the institution hosts an amazing collection of 20th century American modernism and some even more amazing view of the Atlantic Ocean as we're seated on 3 acres of land right on and adjacent to Perkins Cove overlooking the ocean. So really a remarkable institution space.
Oh,
And then I came to the institution after spending time at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum and the Metropolitan Museum before that.
wonderful, wonderful. You couldn't have a more gorgeous setting for a museum. Oh, it's fabulous. It's fabulous. You know, before we jump right to the exhibition, I think it would be of interest also to hear a little bit about Anthony Cudahy as an artist, a person, a little background information before we jump in and appreciate his artwork.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony was born in Fort Myers, Florida. He received his BFA at Pratt Institute in New York, and then an MFA at Hunter College in 2020. And he lives in Brooklyn with his husband, Ian Lewandowski, who's also an artist. Anthony is one of these few people that I can't speak to just how incredibly generous, caring, kind, and wonderful a person beyond his artistic mastery. And you see that with the amount of support and network of artists who have also kind of shared and contributed to this project as well that have all come out. And just as a painter, a draftsman, I think visitors to the exhibition will be amazed by his range, as we'll see in some of the images. Is he really truly is a masterful painter, and I'm excited for folks to see his work up in person and in the flesh.
You know, to better appreciate it and put it in context, what's an example or some examples of the inspiration for his work?
Yes, I mean, Anthony is as much a painter as he is an archivist. Anthony mines through troves of material from art historical references to queer archives to family photos to staged photography, and weaves all of these historical references with deeply personal experiences that produce just this remarkable body of work that kind of feels as if it's part of some larger narrative and we're all just kind of getting glimpses into a world in which he's created. It's remarkable.
For sure, for sure. Well, continuing, why and how did the exhibition come about? How were you fortunate to make the contact or pull this off?
As I've been trying to define what an exhibition program looks like at the Ogunquit Museum, I'm constantly thinking through uh, polls that we've sort of set about trying to draw parallels between, the museum's site and also, the content and artists that we're engaging, um, its legacy in early 20th century modernism and art history more broadly versus this kind of contemporary impulse that we also have, and always thinking through these larger narratives of being and thinking about its location within Maine, but then the United States writ large. We are a museum of American art in all of its complicated meanings. And as I've been diving into and was diving into Ogunquit's history, thinking both its long tradition with figurative painters, I've mentioned Hartley, Yasuo Kuniyoshi, all of these amazing folks who've passed through. Ogunquit also being a site for queer leisure and artistic creation throughout the 20th century, with figures ranging from, I mentioned Marston Hartley, Cy Twombly, all these folks have spent time in Ogunquit. And all that led me to knowing kind of this larger generation of figurative painters that have been working over the last 15 years and doing amazing work. I've been following Anthony's for quite some time, and knowing his interest and archival material and work and reference through and mining through art history, exploring and thinking about queer history as well and elevating those stories in his work. It just was a perfect match, and I'm so pleased that Anthony has been working with us on this project.
Most definitely. Well, you've assembled an outstanding selection of his work, which grouped in various categories. Let's take a look at the first one labeled Figures.
Yeah, so the exhibition as visitors will come, and this is very much a sneak preview. We are still in the midst of installation, so I'm excited to share this. Spinneret is a show that contains about 31 works by Anthony, all paintings. And the title of the show references the silk producing organ in spiders and other insects of the like. And the concept that we were thinking about when speaking with Anthony is this interconnected, non-linear form of storytelling, very much a la a web, how it is all connected, but one can pick their own path and navigate them through these different passages along each thread. And so as we've been laying out the show, there aren't these concise, specific groupings or thematic explorations with a selection of exemplifying images, but rather there are roughly 7 themes that lay out and are touch points or touchstones for visitors to think about and reflect as they then move and navigate this web of an exhibition, and find all of these different connections that exist throughout Anthony's work. So one of the themes is or is the figure. Anthony is often described as a figurative painter. The figure plays a central role in how he thinks about, interprets, and meditates on our present moment and just the condition of being, as Friedrich Nietzsche might say, human all too human at a moment of this kind of dramatic, convulsive period in history that we're living through. And his approach to the figure, and I hope visitors enjoy seeing the range of approaches to discussing or representing the figure, and you can see it in this wonderful gallery hang that I've tried to mimic as we've hung it in the gallery itself. Is they range from these billowing, almost atmospheric representations of people, persons, figures that come often out of archival photography. So these figures may be known or unknown in often many cases, to these incredibly detailed, specific, highly rendered representations. One looks at Anthony's dog Seneca, who's peering into the iris there, that just capture these incredible moments of detail and specificity, of personhood, of subjectivity in that figure that is being represented. So it's this wonderful push-pull and ebb and flow as we slide between these almost abstract passages that appear in some of his figures, to these hyper-rendered, hyper-specific things. And that allows him to think about and explore personhood, how we have these moments of intimate, personal, detailed existence, and then other times we enter into these performative roles. As I mentioned, Anthony's husband, Ian Lewandowski, who's a photographer and artist himself, is one of Anthony's muses. He will appear as a character or himself throughout the exhibition in many works. You can see on this screen right now in the center, there is a specific image of Ian, or a representation of Ian backlit. And then other times, like in Reader, he becomes a character, a figure, something much more abstracted, that allows Anthony to then mine into ideas of allegorical representation and more symbolic modes of thinking about the figure in his work.
They're so captivating. A few words about the process Anthony goes through from maybe beginning to a work like this that we're enjoying, some of his steps or procedure, sketching. A little bit about that, please.
Yeah, Anthony, again, accumulates this archive of referential imagery that he sorts through and works through and kind of constructs images from. And then, we'll kind of work on modeling some figures, details that he's working through. But he paints wet on wet. And so what you see that is lost in the photographs, and visitors will understand immediately as they walk into the exhibition, is it is painted quickly, remarkably sometimes at a speed in sittings, and that captures every single fray in the brush that he's working with. That is, as he kind of moves through, it's not these sort of very delicately built up layers, even though there's passages of that just are these kind of incredibly confident, daring moves of the brush and pigment that are just almost theatrical if you look up at details. It's really something.
What also doesn't do justice the images are the striking colors that he has throughout his work that really need to be appreciated in person.
And his palette is so idiosyncratic. I mean, you walk through and there's moments where you're encountering these bright, almost citrine yellows and deep, deep, deep reds. And then you'll have this passage of an incredibly earthy brown or just unexpected color combinations of teals and the like that make these works just pop, and you don't understand why he would have been gravitated towards that color, but it somehow solidifies or anchors the work. And so you could see too, I included these images as well, just to show that Anthony is constantly thinking through this legacy of painters before him, this self-portrait, this tradition of self-portraiture, this work in honor of Francis Bacon, as well as Joan Brown. But Anthony is in constant dialogue, of course, with his peers, but he will often think about and ruminates on figures like Luke Toymans or Nicole Eisenman, of course, is a big figure that you'll often see compositionally inspiration from in his works. To other folks, along with Josephine Halverson, who might be familiar to many in the Boston area, and Philip Guston, Jennifer Packer, all of these kind of figures that he's constantly thinking about, along with art historical, Renaissance, medieval painters, Peter Bruegel the Elder, Titian, and the like, that will make appearances as well.
Incredible range. Moving on to the next category you've assembled, fragments. What can we look forward to with these examples?
Yes, and this is something that, again, are scattered throughout Anthony's work, is as this painter who dives into archives, some photographic. So in the case of Sunset that's on the screen, Anthony, along with his husband Ian, have been resuscitating this trove of personal photography from his late great uncle, Kenny Gardner. And so images from these photographs that they're redeveloping and digitizing, comes in and it becomes this kind of meditation on vernacular photography, about these striking scenes of images that, as they move further and further away from the figure that took them, detail becomes less, your knowledge and mystery of the scene grows, as you are unable to understand why this image was taken, and answers will always be kind of kept from you. And so, there's those kinds of more photographic fragments. Then there, of course, are literally art historical fragments. So in this wonderful painting, Three Ages, we see pieces or fragments of Renaissance and medieval paintings that influenced Anthony in this work. So in this case, Titian's Three Ages of Man are captured in the two skulls that hang on the ledge in the upper right, the sort of stunted tree or the stag in the background in the field are all pulled from Titian's allegory of the life or the ephemerality of life. Or Anthony in this pose, single shoed or barefooted with a clenched fist is a reference to Peter Bruegel's Netherlandish proverbs. There's a small passage in that painting of a figure running his head against a wall holding a knife. Again, an allegorical figure of futility. And so this work becomes both a meditation on the expectations of social expectations on how we navigate life, of children of all these likes, and sort of filtering that, interpreting that from his perspective as a queer man, to also just meditating on the brevity of it and its sort of relationship to art writ large.
One more before we move on.
Yes. And you could see some of the fragments that kind of fall into this work as he sort of thinks through it.
Let's go on to space. We have an example.
Yeah, so another touchstone, again, is, Anthony is constantly navigating and working through and thinking about architecture, space, physical space. So many of his works are staged frequently in thresholds of buildings, doorways, passageways, and how space can be defined, how it's used, how we encounter figures within space, and how we come to know and define spaces. So from this really breathtaking just portrait of a figure, who's we only are given a bit of a glimpse, a fragment, one could say, even of this bedroom, possibly seen his reflection just given to us slightly in the tilt of the mirror that's leaned up against the wall, and Anthony's visage also kind of barely visible in there as well. Or this really beautiful painting called Annunciation Scene with Billy Sullivan photograph, a taped up photograph in which the Annunciation is restaged as the angel Gabriel is taken or replaced by a photograph of a nude man in costume, butterfly wings, and the kind of Virgin Mary waiting for this divine inspiration is replaced by a man kind of tucked under sheets. And so how these spaces are kind of created and made intimate, made queer, and explored in those kind of constructions are part and parcel with this sort of theme that we touch off for visitors.
And this next category, what's in mind with slippages?
Yes, so this is something that we were discussing in one of Anthony's constant ruminations, if I could take it from the title of this painting, is on how we experience and move through our lived daily lives, and how those experiences are often affected by our moods, by the images that flicker across our iPhones or smartphones or computer screens, and how our reality is constantly porous and bled into by all of these different animating things that can shape how we experience a space. Or his kind of ideas as well, using these figures, these apparitions, to kind of stand in for fears and emotions and anxieties if we were to describe something or an event from a pre-modern perspective, how someone pre-scientifically would understand, possibly in the case of this image, what the smoke-induced or inundated space of New York City during the Canadian wildfires last year would feel like would be the cause, by this almost Hieronymus Bosch-esque demonic force that's appearing there. And so that occurs throughout many of his works, that these passages, these moments of super reality kind of exist. So in the case with Lily and the Snake Bundle, this Ouroboros snake bundle appears, mimicking or standing in for these kind of intrusive thoughts that come with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is something that Anthony has dealt with. to even just the figure of death on horseback, which is a reference to a 14th century series of tapestries on the apocalypse biblical story. And is this a tapestry? Is this a wallpaper? Or is this an apparition that's coming into someone's apartment as they're moving, at a time where I feel like cataclysmic thinking is often very prevalent in many of our lives at this moment.
Nice, nice. And allegories here.
Yeah, and another thing again is Anthony works very much in the realm of allegory, in the same vein that Spinneret is meant to evoke this nonlinear form of storytelling. Allegories assist very much in a non-linear form of telling, of these different kind of codes and coding and ways of creating an image that seems or speaks in one way to a narrative, but also has another narrative at the same time. So in Open Window, Blue Blue Room, I mean, on the one hand, it becomes almost an allegory of touch. These two figures kind of intimately entwined. The figure kind of on his back is touching two flowers, a pansy and a narcissus flower, both standing in for love and death, these kind of allegorical signs and symbols that sort of treat us to many thoughts and reflections of just painting itself as well. And that almost allegory of painting too, for those who see this in person, and it's difficult to get a sense in the image, is the background wall is a tour de force of painterly touch. Each square ranges from kind of a thin liquidy wash of push-pull painting to these like heavily gestured thick impastos, and it just becomes, if you were to zoom in, you would think you were in a monochromatic abstract expressionist painting. It's remarkable. So these are constantly again another device, a figurative way of how Anthony constructs and thinks about his storytelling and imagery.
Wonderful. Well, we want to try to get a little sense of one or two more categories. And before we hear melancholy, I just have to say, and this is a fabulous example, how the colors can't get over the attraction I'm finding with the colors of his work, and just captivating. Fabulous.
No,
Can't wait to visit in person to really appreciate it.
And they leap off the canvas, and this is sort of where this category actually came out of. Is there is such a visual seduction in these at times almost acidic, bright hued colors, and this is a wonderful example where you then see it mixed in with these muddied grays and kind of deeply earthen tones. But there's this malaise that exists throughout Anthony's work. As you've seen, I've already mentioned him kind of meditating on the ephemerality of life. These motifs of death that constantly come in, this sense of figures often looking, reflecting, pondering, that's often drilled, or at least caught in this pause or moment of thinking of what's to come. And so again, we see in just this image, the flower symbol is what Anthony's called a mutant flower, him meditating on how doubling and multiplication can lead to cancerous growth. To the figure in the foreground, who is modeled by his husband, but after Caravaggio's Narcissus. Again, that's echoed and mirrored by the flower that's on the table, and thinking about mutation, death, and all of the like that are frequently a part of his repertoire of figures that repeat throughout his work. And again, you can see the reference that he had his husband recreate and then photographed himself for this painting.
Very good. Let's move on to final category and hear a little bit about nature.
Yes, and so finally, again, nature, which blends into, again, melancholy and all the other themes that I've sort of spoken about. But Anthony is constantly reflecting on this divide between humanity and the natural world, its artifice, how we go about doing it through botanical studies and scientific programs, from books of hours to 19th century scientific journals, and he culls and sources these imagery. So the anti-Bowser tree painting is actually taken from a woodcut print from the 14th century that shows the Bowser tree, this kind of mythical tree that was poisonous and toxic. And so the composition, and I believe it might be illustrated on the next slide, is taken from that as he thinks about, both this moment where are these figures who are posed by himself and his husband asleep, or dead, and these references to death, both in the Bausar tree, the wolfsbane flower in purple that's creeping up on both, exist. Even the webbing and the spider up above was inspired by Kate Bush, the British singer's song "A Coral Room," which she wrote right after her mother's death. So, there's these multiplicity of reactions and reflections of thinking of our contact with nature.
Nice. And one final image to enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah. So, and even again, I mentioned that Anthony kind of mines through queer art history and archives. So the image on the left is Jarman and Dungeness of Derek Jarman, the gay rights activist and filmmaker, who, after receiving a diagnosis of HIV in 1986, purchased a small cottage in the southeast of England and cultivated this garden there that he journaled about and wrote about constantly, that became this kind of transcendent space in nature, as he lived out his diagnosis until he died young in 1994. Or even the figure on the right, Eroded Beach, which came, about thinking of this doubling our relationship to the natural world. We have this kind of doppelganger figure in the background, and came partially out of a visit that Anthony made to the museum, which we have a work on the next slide, by another queer figurative painter who resided at mid-century in Ogunquit named Channing Hare, who did this really remarkable and haunting painting that's in the museum's collection that Anthony saw, and thinking about, beach going in Ogunquit's history there as well. So it's a really remarkable range in all these works.
Wonderful. There we go.
Yeah.
Nice. In addition to the exhibition, much anticipated, I know you've orchestrated some related programming. Can you give us just a little sense of what visitors can look forward to as far as enriching activities connected to the exhibition?
Yes, the museum hosts monthly lectures on the second Tuesday of the month. So Anthony will join us in July, on July 9th, for a conversation. But before then, in May, we'll be hosting a panel of contemporary painters from Maine, who'll be speaking about their use of the figure in their work. And then likewise, in June, we'll be hosting another panel on artists engaging concepts of nature, contemporary painters in Maine as well. So that'll be May 14th and June 11th. And then Anthony will be on site July 9th. And then visitors could also find the catalog that'll be accompanying the exhibition, published by Monticelli Press. And so many other programs that will also be kind of popping up as we run through the first half of our season.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, Devon, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the program. I want to thank you again for taking the time to be here, for giving us this sort of sneak preview of Anthony Cudahy Spinneret. Look forward to visiting sometime during the summer, and continued success with future endeavors.
Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate the time and hope to see all your viewers with us beginning April 12th.
Wonderful. Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us, and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.